Good morning. I'm Marianne Vega Clancy, the president of our North County San Diego League of Women Voters. We are over 200 members, men and women, committed to empowering our local voters and defending our American democracy. For over 100 years, the League has been providing voters with nonpartisan information so that they can make informed voting choices. As part of our education work, we host candidate forums to hear from local candidates and where they stand on important issues facing our community. As you may know, the mission of the League is to encourage informed and active participation in government and increase understanding of major public policy issues. Besides candidate forums, we register voters. We provide informational talks about issues on the ballot, which is what we are doing today. We are proudly nonpartisan. We neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government, but we do work on issues of concern to our members and to the public, and our advocacy arm does sometimes take a position on these issues. However, our speakers today are representatives of the educational arm of the League, and they will remain neutral on the propositions and will show both the arguments for and against each proposition. Pros and cons are unbiased. Presentations of state and local ballot measures where each measure is explained, which groups support and oppose it, and how much money is funding the campaigns. We did the research here in San Diego to make your pre-voting research easier, to inform you and assist you when you exercise your right to vote. And this is a nonpartisan volunteer effort that is being repeated throughout California, indeed throughout the entire country at over 700 leagues. By being here today, you are part of the largest grassroots movement in the history of democracy. So welcome. Defending democracy starts at the local level, where our elected officials often have the most impact in our lives. Let me now introduce Mandy Butler, our Pros and Cons Chair. Mandy Butler is the chair of our Pros and Cons Committee for the League of Women Voters of North County, San Diego. In this role, she and a team of other League members research and present information about the state propositions and local measures that appear on our ballots. Mandy lives in Del Mar. She is a retired professor of biological sciences at UCSD and a biotech scientist. Please welcome Mandy Butler.
Okay. Thanks so much. I'm going to be co-presenting with Kathy Nauman, sitting over here, and we'll be taking turns. We first have to give a disclaimer about what we're going to present here. So when propositions are submitted to the Secretary of State, the Secretary of State solicits arguments from different groups, and they submit their arguments in favor or against these propositions. However, and most of what we're going to show you is actually from the arguments as they're published in the official voter guide, which you should all have at this point. But we cannot vouch for their accuracy, and they do not reflect either our personal opinion or the stance of the League. They reflect the supporters and opponents' opinions and may not always be based on fact. So just that caveat before we start. Okay, before we actually get into the individual propositions, I just want to remind everyone how propositions get on the ballot. And there's two different ways propositions appear on the ballot. One is from the legislature. So the legislature can pass laws and without our having to vote on them. But for certain things, they first have to pass a law by 2/3 in both houses, and then have us vote on them as well. And those are things like constitutional amendments, bond issues, and if they want to change a statute or law that was put into place by a previous proposition. In those cases, they have to have the voters approve it by a simple majority. The other way propositions appear on the ballot is through citizen initiatives. California is one of 26 states where we have this process by which citizens, without any input from the governor or the legislature, can get propositions on the ballot. And these propositions can create laws or change the Constitution. They do this by collecting signatures. I'm sure all of us have had the experience of being asked to sign something in front of a grocery store. Often those are people collecting signatures to get these ballots, propositions on the ballot. Now, we're going to refer to these as citizen initiatives. And let me just make sure. So at this point, I'd just like to say, we focus so much on candidates, what candidate we're going to vote for, do all the research, watch debates, and so on. But so much of our governance here in California is done via this proposition process. And it's very important to understand that and really understand what you're voting for. Now, as we look at this, I want to mention the state propositions, whether they're a citizen initiative or a legislatively referred proposition, all require just a simple majority to pass, so 50% plus one. We'll see later when we talk about local measures, those may require a higher threshold. So if we look at the types of propositions on the November ballot, there are 5 legislatively referred propositions and 5 citizens initiatives. Usually there are more citizen initiatives. This year there's equal numbers of both. You'll notice the legislatively referred ones all have single digits this year, and the citizen initiatives have double digits. Of the 5 legislatively referred, 2 are bond issues and 3 are constitutional amendments. All of the citizen initiatives will either create or revoke a state statute. So none of those will change the Constitution. So that's just kind of an overview of what we're looking at, okay? As we go, I'm going to use the first proposition of an example of the flow we're going to use for all the subsequent propositions. So this one might take a little more time than some of the others, but we'll use this as an example. When we get to the first 5 propositions, at the bottom of the title slide, we're going to show you the number of votes in the Senate and the Assembly. The ayes will be first and the nays second. So if we look at the first one, you can see at the bottom here, I have, we've put, for example, this would be 34 yes, 3 no, 72 yes, 1 no. That'll be the same for the rest of them. Okay, so let's start getting into the details here. So this is Proposition 2, and it asks the question, should this state authorize $10 billion in bonds to build new or renovate existing public schools and community colleges? And on each proposition will show you the title slide, and then we'll try to give you a little background into why this proposition was put on the ballot. So in California, there's about 10,000 K through 12 schools and about 115 community colleges. Many of these are in bad repair, broken air conditioning, leaking roofs, and so on. And many of them have health and safety violations. But the state has no permanent funding stream for facilities construction and repair for schools. And for the past 20 years or so, the bulk of the funding for facilities has come from bonds, both state and local bonds. Typically what happens is that the state will offer a bond issue, like they're asking here, and that money they'll provide about 50 to 60% to local school districts and community colleges. The local school districts and community colleges then have to raise kind of the matching funds, and they usually do that by issuing local school bonds. So again, the state proposition to raise bonds only requires a simple majority for approval. When the school districts have to offer their local bonds to find the matching funds, those require a 55% approval. And we'll talk about that later. This comes into play later. So first, a little background. So in 2016, California voters approved Proposition 51, which issued $9 billion in bonds for improvement of public schools and community colleges. However, in 2020, when the legislature felt they needed more money for facilities, they put Proposition 13 on the ballot, which would have authorized $15 billion in bonds for schools and college facilities. This didn't pass. So it's been 8 years since we've had a proposition passed for school facilities. And most of the money from the 2016 bond issue has been spent. So if Proposition 2 passes, the $10 billion in state and general obligation bonds or funds will be distributed as follows. And you can see that most of the money, $7.3 billion, will go for new construction and renovation of K through 12 schools. $1.5 billion will go to community colleges, and the rest, $0.6 billion each, will go to charter schools and tech ed. That's how the money will be divided. Now, the proposition does have language that expands eligibility, has financial hardship grants for small and disadvantaged school districts. It also provides a higher percentage of state matching funds to schools demonstrating the greatest need. Okay. Now, what will this cost? So all of the data we're going to show you about fiscal impact comes from a nonpartisan legislative analyst office. And they estimate that it will cost about $500 million a year for 35 years to pay back this bond. The effect on local governments would depend on the choices they make about repairs and abilities, about whether they decide to go for matching funds and raise their own local bond issues. Just to, just because this is we have another bond issue, I'm just going to mention that the state right now has about $70 billion in bond debt from previous bond issues. And there's about $30 billion more that has been approved, but bonds haven't been issued. Altogether, the state pays about $8 billion a year to pay back bonds. This prop would add another, $500 million a year to the amount the state has to pay back. Overall, the total debt burden that the state has, this $8 billion a year, is about 3% of the general fund. And most people say it's financially prudent to keep that debt ratio below 6%. So it's a little confusing, but altogether, if both of the bond issues pass, it will raise up how much has to be paid back for bonds to about 3.5% of the general fund will be used to pay back bonds. But again, there's kind of this 6% cutoff, and we are still below that. And this actually will pay 3.5 is actually lower percentage of the general fund being used to pay back bonds than it has been in the past. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is the state won't have to raise taxes or anything to pay back these bonds. It will come out of the general fund. We've had questions about that from other groups, so I kind of wanted to explain that now. So what we're going to do now is show you the arguments for and against and who those groups are. And on all those subsequent slides that relate to this, any name here over on the left with an asterisk are groups that signed the ballot arguments. They are groups that submitted ballot arguments to the Secretary of State. And you can see this in your voter guide. Sometimes we've also put some other groups on there, but those are the ones that have signed and presented the ballot arguments. So what do these groups say? Well, they say that Prop 2, if approved, will provide funding for outdated facilities needing repairs and upgrades to meet basic health and safety standards. It will provide strict taxpayer accountability is built into this, and it will protect local control. Funding can only be used for projects approved by local school districts. Opponents, and you can see them on the left, our school districts will have to issue matching local bonds to match the funds from the state, and those are paid for by raising property taxes. Prop 2 is unnecessary because school enrollment is declining, and the state should include school repairs in its regular budget from the general fund. We also like to show campaign contributions for each of the propositions. Now, just like candidates have to raise money to advertise, so do supporters and opponents of these propositions raise money to advertise their position and get you to vote either yes or no, according to their group's stance. And I'm sure you're seeing ads about some of the citizen initiatives. A lot of this goes to advertising. So you can see on the left, about $8 million has been raised, and I just list some of the biggest donors on the left to this. No money has been raised by the opponents. Okay? So I'll just let you look at that for a second. Again, on all the slides that show this financial data, this all comes from the Secretary of State's website using a tool they have there, a search engine called Power Search. So if you're ever interested in finding out who's donating to things, you can go to that site. Okay, so finishing up, we'll move a little quicker through the rest, but yes, if you vote yes on Prop 2, this supports issuing $10 million in bonds to fund construction and renovation of education facilities, and no on Prop 2 opposes issuing these bonds. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Hi, I'm Kathy. Okay, now we're going to move on to Proposition 3, which is on the constitutional right to marriage. This one's a little more straightforward, also a change to the Constitution. So, should the state repeal the constitutional provision that limits marriage to a man and a woman? In 2008, the voters approved Proposition 8, which defined marriage as between one man and one woman in the state constitution. Prop 8 was effectively invalidated by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2015. However, we've never changed the language in the California Constitution to match that. So if passed, Prop 3 will amend the state constitution. The text that states only marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized in California will be removed. It'll be replaced with text stating that the right to marry is a fundamental right, would be added in there. And Prop 3 updates the California Constitution to align with what the federal courts say about who can marry. The fiscal impact on this would not change who is allowed to marry in California, and there would be no change in revenue or costs to state or local governments. And again, this is the supporters page and who has signed the ballot and other supporters. State law, they say that state law banning same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. Although marriage equality is currently the law in the United States, this could change because courts can change. The state needs to ensure that the right to marriage is enshrined in the state constitution. Opponents say that the law currently already protects the right to marry, thus Prop 3 is unnecessary. The amendment removes important protections for marriage while pretending to expand rights. Prop 3 removes protections against child marriages, incest, and polygamy. This one kind of falls in that category of there are other laws in the state that protect against child marriage and incest. So, okay, contributions here. We have about $3 million for the yes campaign, and no dollars have been spent. And what I didn't point out on the beginning, one that introduced this was unanimous in the state legislature to put this on the ballot. Okay, so a yes vote on Prop 3 supports changing the language in the California Constitution regarding marriage to concur with federal law. No vote on Prop 3 opposes changing the language in the California Constitution regarding marriage.
Okay, now we're on to Prop 4. This one is another legislatively referred. Should voters let the state sell $10 million in bonds for safe drinking water, wildfire prevention, flood control, and other environmental protection projects? This, again, was put on the ballot by the legislature. They say that many citizens don't have access to safe drinking water. Destructive forest fires, droughts, and floods are becoming more common in California. climate change is affecting farming, water quality, and wildlife. And there was a recent the recent budget deficit led to $9 billion in cuts from programs meant to reduce pollution and greenhouse gases. So what would this do if approved? It would allow the state to issue $10 billion in bonds, again, to fund programs. And actually, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is a little more specific in terms of what it would fund. So you can see, again, 38, this shows the percentage of the bond issue that would go to these different efforts. Again, 38% of $10 billion is $3.8 billion. So most of the money, or the largest chunk, will go to safe drinking water, drought, flood, and water resilience, 15% wildfire and forest resilience, 12% to land conservation and habitat restoration, 12% to coastal resilience, energy infrastructure, park creation, and so on. You can see. Now this, one of the interesting things about this proposition is that the language of the proposition requires that at least 40% of these funds goes to projects that aid vulnerable populations or disadvantaged communities, where the median household income is less than 80% of the area average or of the statewide median. So it does have that part in the proposition. Again, we've already talked now about bonds. This one would be paid back $400 million a year for 40 years. But the Legislative Analyst's Office says that these bonds would fund projects that could reduce future risks and thus the cost of damage from disasters. So you can see the supporters, some of the supporters on the left. They say that Prop 4 is necessary because it will help our state become more resilient to climate change, help us shift from disaster response to disaster prevention, and it makes efficient, sensible investments in proven solutions. The opponents are on the left. They say California already has too much bond debt. They say these clean drinking water, wildlife prevention are necessary. They're not against what these funds would be used for, but they say that these efforts should be funded again within our current state budget from the general fund. And they say that Prop 4 lacks fiscal accountability and specific standards for measuring success. Again, here are the campaign contributions as of, I guess, yesterday. Again, about $8 million from groups supporting the proposition. You can see their names on the left, a lot of environmental groups. And there's been no contributions from groups opposing the proposition. Just look at that for a second. So, yes on Prop 4, supports issuing $10 billion in bonds to fund environmental protection projects, water infrastructure, energy, and flood protection projects. And no opposes issuing these $10 billion dollars in bonds.
Okay, moving on to Proposition 5. The question is, should the state lower the voter approval requirement for local bonds from 67% to 55%? Background here is that currently many of the local bond issues, including those to fund affordable housing and infrastructure projects, require 2/3 of voters. Public infrastructure includes water and sewer systems, public transportation, libraries, broadband internet, and hospitals. Local school bonds only require 55% of the voters, whereas these infrastructure ones currently require 67%. So if passed, it will lower the supermajority vote requirement from 66.7% to 55% for local jurisdictions to issue bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure projects. It will allow local governments to assess property taxes above 1% to repay bonds. And this will apply to any of the qualifying local bond measures that are passed this November. The fiscal impact here, there likely more local bond issues would pass. More affordable housing and public infrastructure could be constructed. Property taxes could increase in order to pay the costs of the bonds. The supporters here say that Prop 5 gives local voters more control over funding for affordable housing and vital infrastructure projects. Prop 5 supports affordable housing for low and middle income Californians, and allowing just 1/3 of voters to overrule the wishes of 2/3 is undemocratic. The opponents of this proposition say that it will increase property taxes in order to pay back bonds, shift what should be the state's burden to local taxpayers, and undo the taxpayer protections that California voters embedded into the state constitution with Prop 13. And here we have one that does have people on both sides. Yes, has about 12 or 11.5 million dollars, and the No campaign has 30 million. You can take a look at who those groups are. And so, in summary, a yes vote on Prop 5 will support lowering the vote threshold from 66.67 to 55% for local bond measures to fund housing projects and infrastructure. A no vote means you oppose lowering the vote threshold from the 67.67 to 55.
Okay, we're down to the last legislatively referred. And this one, the language is a little confusing, but when we go to the background, hopefully it will become clear what they're asking. But the question they're asking is, should this state repeal language prohibiting involuntary servitude except to punish crime and replace it with language prohibiting involuntary servitude? So let's look at this a little closer. Right now, the Constitution, the state constitution, the language, bans involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. The Constitution doesn't define what involuntary, I'm having trouble with that word today, involuntary servitude means, but it commonly refers to people being forced to work against their will. People in prison and jail, thus, can be required to work or do other activities such as taking classes. And the state's prison system currently employs about 40,000 people who, complete a variety of work such as construction, cooking, cleaning, firefighting. Most of them earn less than 74 cents an hour. People who refuse to work, people in prisons or jails who refuse to work, can face consequences, such as losing the ability to make regular phone calls. Workers instead of being paid, can earn time credits that basically reduce their sentence. So let's look at what this proposition would do. So this proposition would change the state constitution to ban involuntary servitude as a punishment for a crime. Thus, it would ban state prisons and jails from disciplining people who refuse to work. However, it would still allow prisons to give people reduced time credits for working. Okay? The fiscal effects are hard to calculate according to the Legislative Analyst's Office. They say prisons and jails might have to increase pay, and thus costs could increase. But if they give more time credits instead, costs could decrease because people in prison would serve less time. Now, here are the supporters for this on the left. This is interesting because this proposition was put on the ballot very late, right before the cutoff. And a lot of the input from this came from the Black Legislative Caucus, actually. The supporters say involuntary servitude is an extension of slavery. Prop 6 prioritizes rehabilitation for incarcerated people, and it says that incarcerated people should be able to choose the jobs and shifts they want. This is an interesting one because no official argument was submitted at the time that this was, the proposition was submitted to the Secretary of State. However, since then, Howard Jarvis taxpayers have come out against it. Here's how much money has been raised on this. You can see it's about $1 million. And finally, so yes on Prop 6 supports repealing the language in the Constitution. And what this language says is it prohibits involuntary servitude except to punish crime. And the proposition would replace it with language prohibiting involuntary servitude in all cases. So hopefully that's clear because the language is a little confusing. And then no on Prop 6, you oppose repealing the language and it would stay as it is. Okay? Okay.
Okay, so moving on, these are the community initiatives that we talked about. Proposition 32, California's $18 minimum wage initiative. The question asks, should the minimum wage for all workers be increased to $18 per hour by 2026? In March of 2016, the state legislature passed a bill that increased the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. The bill, which was SB 3, required an annual increase in the minimum wage until the amount reached $15 on January 1st, 2022 for employers that had 26 workers or more, and employers with less employees than that had till January 1st, 2023. Thereafter, the bill provided that the minimum wage would increase based on changes to the U.S. Consumer Price Index. It is currently $16 per hour for most people and $20 for fast food workers. Healthcare workers will eventually receive $25 per hour, according to the law that Governor Newsom signed last year. So many California cities already have higher minimum wages already. San Diego, the minimum wage is $16.85. San Francisco, the minimum wage is $18.07. So like the previous wage bill, this ballot initiative would increase the minimum wage at different speeds depending on whether an employer has 26 or more workers or 25 or less workers. For employers with 26 or more, they would need to reach $18 an hour by January 1st of 2025. For employers with 25 or less workers, the minimum wage would reach $18 on January 1st of 26. And also, like SB 3, the minimum wage would be tied to the U.S. Consumer Price Index after it reaches $18. So the fiscal impact here, it's unclear what the changes in tax revenues would be. There would be an increase in state and local costs, likely higher prices and lower profits. And it could reduce the number of people on Medi-Cal. Sorry, I went too fast. Okay, the opponents say that employers already face increased costs from inflation and supply shortages. Raising the minimum wage increases the state's expenses by raising government labor costs. Prop 32 will cost jobs with the greatest impact on people trying to get a career started with entry-level jobs.
Kathy, you forgot the supporters. Go back one slide.
Oh, go back. So. Oh, I forgot. Oh, I didn't read the supporters. Okay, got it. I'm like, wait. Okay, yeah. So they're just saying that the minimum supporters say. Sorry about that. The supporters say the minimum wage has not kept pace with the cost of living because wages are too low. Prop 32 will improve the economy by increasing spending, and that increasing the wages of many Medi-Cal recipients will make them eligible for California's health benefit exchange, saving the state millions of dollars in Medi-Cal costs. Sorry about that. I already read about that one. Okay, and seeing where the money is being spent here, we have about $610,000 money going towards the Yes campaign, and about $110,000 for the No campaign. You can see here who falls on which side. And then summing it up, so yes on Prop 32 supports increasing the state minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2026 for all employees. Prop no opposes increasing the state minimum wage to $18 per hour.
I realize on that previous slide I forgot to add something, which is that it says 10,000 from Joseph Sandberg. He actually, in 2022, contributed 10 million to get this on the ballot. So I forgot to add that. This is just this year's numbers. So, okay, so we're all going to take a breath because those were the easy propositions. Now we're going to start on the hard propositions, the ones that are the most complex, confusing, and I think I can say the most controversial. So we're going to try our best to explain these, but they are very complex and may require some extra research on your part afterwards. So we're going to start, again, all of the rest are citizens' initiatives. Prop 33 allow local governments to impose rent control. And the question they're asking is, should voters repeal the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995 and allow local governments to impose rent control? Okay, so a current state law called the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which was enacted actually by the legislature in 1995, generally prohibits cities and counties from limiting the initial rate that landlords can charge on new rent tenants in all types of housing, and from limiting rent increases to a certain extent on single-family homes, condos, and new construction as of the bill signing in 1995. Governor Newsom did sign a bill in 2019 limiting annual rent increases to 5% plus inflation, a maximum of 10%. And this law is in effect till 2030, but there's also some limitations on what type of housing it can actually affect. Some cities in California also do have rent control laws that have limits on how much landlords can increase rent per year. But in general, this Costa-Hawkins law prevents cities and counties from limiting the initial rate that landlords may charge to tenants in all types of housing except in apartments built before 1995. Now, a little background on this. So, opponents of the Costa-Hawkins law, this has primarily been led by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and they are trying to overturn this law again with this proposition. They were the main driving force between similar ballot propositions that failed in 2018 and 2020. Now, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is a nonprofit that provides medicine and health care to individuals living with or affected by HIV and AIDS. But it has hundreds of clinics all over the country and in California. But the foundation, besides being this AIDS Healthcare Foundation, has also become a big proponent of rent control. And when you'll see the money later, they are the ones who really got this on the ballot, and they were also the driving force for the two previous propositions. So if this passes, it would repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act, so cities and communities control local rents on any type of housing. They can set rent control laws for any type of housing. And it would prohibit the state from, in the future, limiting the ability of cities and counties to limit or expand rent control. So it would prevent them from making a law again like the Costa-Hawkins law. So what would this do? So the Legislative Analyst's Office, there's a lot to this one, but here's some of what they expect. Expanded rent control could provide more affordable housing, and people would probably have to move less. However, the value of rental housing could decline because potential landlords couldn't charge as much and they wouldn't want to pay as much for these properties. This could reduce the amount of property taxes paid by landlords because the value of their properties would decrease. And they say that fewer homes would be available to rent because landlords might sell their properties because they would be of less value. So, who are the supporters? Again, I mentioned this AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Here are some of the other ones. And they say rent in California is too high. In many places, people starting careers are spending half of their salaries for rent. Prop 33 will allow local governments to tailor policy that works for their communities and residents. And they say corporate landlords are profiting from the lack of housing supply. Here are the opponents. Strict rent control policies will make the housing shortage even worse by reducing the construction of new housing. California already has laws limiting rent hikes, and California voters have shot down this proposal twice already. And here are the, this is the most expensive proposition on the ballot in terms of how much money has been spent for and against it. And I'll just give you a second to absorb this because it's pretty impressive. And you can see who's against it. And as I said, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is the main proponent. Yeah. So, yes on Prop 33 supports allowing cities and counties to limit rent on any type of housing, and no would oppose changing present rent control laws, the Costa-Hawkins law. Kathy gets to do the fun.
Now for the real fun one. Okay, so Proposition 34. It is asking, should the Medi-Cal RX program become permanent, and should certain program providers be required to spend 98% of their revenues on patient care? Okay, so background here is the federal government has given healthcare providers who serve low-income and at-risk patients a way of earning revenue by giving them a discount on drugs. California utilizes this federal discount through the Medi-Cal RX program. Medi-Cal is a federal state program that provides healthcare coverage for low-income people. It's California's version of Medicaid. Okay, so before 2019, Medi-Cal paid for the cost of prescription drugs in different ways. In 2019, via an executive order by Governor Newsom, the state adopted a single approach called Medi-Cal RX. Medi-Cal RX likely saves the state money because Medi-Cal pays for the drugs at more discounted prices. But Medi-Cal RX is not presently state law. So it was put in place by an executive order. The providers who participate in this program can buy drugs at discounted prices and then charge insurers like Anthem Blue Cross or Medicare the retail value of the drug cost, thus earning revenue that can be used to expand patient services to disadvantaged groups. But there are presently no restrictions on how providers use the money that they save, or how they use their revenues. I can't get that. Okay, so the effects of Prop 30.
Go back.
Oh.
Yeah, read that one.
Okay, so if passed, the Medicare Cal RX program would become permanent as a state law. It would define prescription drug price manipulators as providers that spent over $100 million in any 10-year period on anything other than direct patient care and that operated multifamily housing with over 500 health and safety violations. That's it would require that these providers spend 98% of their revenue on direct patient care. I know that seems oddly specific, which maybe we can kind of get to. So there are over 1,000 providers who participate in the Medi-Cal RX program, but the Legislative Analyst's Office says that very few of them would meet the measure's criteria to qualify as a prescription drug price manipulator. But the exact number isn't really known of how many would meet that criteria. So there would be, it would have limited effects because few healthcare providers would meet the conditions, as we said. There would likely be increased state costs in the millions to enforce the law. Affected providers would be paying the cost. It could increase spending on direct patient care, saving money for the state. So supporters of Prop 34 say that it will permanently authorize the Medi-Cal RX program. It will force the worst abusers of the drug discount program back to the program's original mission of providing health care to low-income patients. It will save taxpayers millions of dollars a year. And you can see, I guess I should say, you can take a look at who the supporters are for this one. And here is what the opponents say. They say that Prop 34 has only one purpose: to prevent AIDS Healthcare Foundation from promoting rent control. Proposition 34 is a grave danger to democracy. If Prop 34 is approved, no organization in the future will be safe from similar retribution. So the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is a provider of the Medi-Cal RX program and would probably fit the criteria in the proposition as a prescription drug manipulator. Okay, here is where the money is going. You can see here the California Apartment Association's issue is primarily behind the Yes campaign, and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation leading the charge no for that. Okay, so yes on 34 supports making the Medi-Cal RX program permanent and requiring specific healthcare providers to spend 98% of revenues from the program on direct patient care. It opposes making the Medi-Cal RX program permanent, requiring specific healthcare providers to spend 98% of the revenues from the program on direct patient care.
Okay, just two left. Okay, Proposition 35 provides permanent funding for Medi-Cal services. Should California make permanent an existing tax on managed healthcare plans to provide ongoing funding for Medi-Cal? This is another pretty confusing one. So California presently taxes managed care organizations, MCOs, such as Anthem Blue Cross. Much of the revenue is used to fund Medi-Cal, which, as Kathy said, provides health coverage to low-income and disabled people. However, this tax is not permanent. The legislature has to approve it every couple of years, and it also has to be approved by the feds. So, and based on recent, so it isn't active right now, so the state is right now charging this tax on healthcare plans, and the legislature has made some recent changes that will increase the amount that the state gets from this tax. It will be about $7 billion a year. Now, lawmakers can use this money to offset some of their existing Medi-Cal costs, because the money, the $7 billion, goes into the general fund. The money from the tax goes into the general fund. But a coalition of doctors, hospitals, and clinics want more of that tax revenue to go to increased payments for Medi-Cal providers and specific Medi-Cal services. They say that especially doctors are not being reimbursed enough from Medi-Cal, and a lot of doctors won't take Medi-Cal patients anymore. So they want this tax to go specifically to purposes they designate. So if passed, this will make the tax permanent, although the feds still have to approve it, require the state to spend the tax revenue only on specified Medi-Cal services, and prohibits the use of these revenues to replace existing Medi-Cal funding in the general fund. What's the fiscal impact? Well, making the tax permanent will increase funding for Medi-Cal and other health programs. Again, $2 billion to $5 billion annually once other costs are factored in. Short-term costs between roughly $1 billion to $2 billion annually to kind of make up for some of the loss of funding in the general fund. And it would give lawmakers less flexibility in how to balance the budget. And that is because this law would make it so those funds go into their own kind of trust, not into the general fund. So supporters, you can see their supporters on the left. And they say that this will protect and expand access to health care for millions of Californians. It will provide dedicated funding for Medi-Cal without raising taxes on individuals. It will include strong accountability measures to ensure funds are spent as intended. There were no official arguments submitted when the proposal was, the proposition was submitted to the Secretary of State, but since then, there are a lot of groups that have come out against it. One thing I would say about this proposition is I believe it's the longest one, and the proposition spells out very specifically how the funds would be used. So it's in the voter guide if you want to look at that. We can't go into it. Anyway, you can see the campaign contributions again. Lots of money, almost 50 million in support of this proposition, primarily from healthcare groups. And no money has been raised against it that I could find. So yes, on Prop 35 supports making the tax on MCOs permanent and dedicating the revenue to specific Medi-Cal expenditures. No on Prop 35 opposes making the tax permanent and dedicating the revenue in these very specific ways. Okay, last one.
Okay, last one. Here we go. So this Proposition 36 is asking, should penalties for some crimes that were reduced from felonies to misdemeanors by Prop 47 be increased back to felonies? So the background here is in 2014, voters passed Prop 47, which reduced property thefts of $950 or less and some drug possession crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. The purpose was to reduce mass incarcerations that led to prison overcrowding. The state prison population was reduced by 9% the year following the proposition's passage. Prop 47 also created the Safe Neighborhood and School Fund, which funneled savings from the lower incarceration rates to mental health and drug treatment programs to keep kids in school and for victim services. However, there has been a small increase in the amount of organized theft, which critics of Prop 47 say is a result of the reduced penalties. In reaction to that, a group of lawmakers, district attorneys, law enforcement groups worked to get this new proposition on the ballot. So if passed, Prop 36 would increase punishments for certain theft and drug crimes. For example, Prop 36 would make a theft of $950 or more a felony if the person has 2 or more past convictions for certain theft crimes. It would add fentanyl to California's list of hard drugs, thereby increasing the penalties for its sale or use. It would also create a new class of crime called treatment-mandated felony, wherein the offender previously convicted of 2 drug offenses receives mental health and substance abuse treatment. Upon a successful completion, the charges would be dropped and the crime expunged from the offender's record. So here is the fiscal impacts of it. It would cut criminal justice costs due to an increase in the prison population, an increased local criminal justice costs primarily due to county jail, community supervision, and court-mandated mental health and drug treatment workload. So here we have the supporters. They say that reduce crime and substance abuse by mandating treatment for felony and drug offenders. It would create tougher laws to stop smash and grab thefts and increase accountability for serial thieves, and that it'll protect businesses in every community. Here, the opponents say that the law already requires felonies for smash and grab robberies, drug trafficking, and repeat theft. Prop 36 will disproportionately target poor people and those with drug problems rather than ringleaders. Prop 36 will reignite the war on drugs and cost taxpayers billions to imprison more people without reducing crime. And where the money is going, the groups for yes on Prop 36 about $13.5 million, and the No campaign has raised $3 million. So a vote of yes on 36 supports the increases in felony charges for certain theft and drug crimes. No on Prop 36 opposes the increases in felony charges for certain theft and drug crimes. And that sums it all up. We have a couple more slides here to show you what sources were used to put all these materials together today. You can check in with those if you'd like to get some additional information. We also have this page, which also offers a lot of different places you can go to get additional information if you'd like. Okay, and I guess that brings us to all of us who are in this room already participating in the League of Women Voters.